What is a directed verdict of acquittal in court? Imagine sitting in a courtroom, watching a trial unfold, and wondering if the case should even go to the jury. Sometimes, the judge makes a decision that stops the trial right there. That decision is called a directed verdict of acquittal. It's a legal move that can end a case before the jury ever gets involved. A directed verdict of acquittal happens when the judge decides that the evidence presented by the prosecution isn't enough to prove the defendant is guilty. The judge looks at all the evidence and asks, could a reasonable jury find guilt based on what I've seen? If the answer is no, the judge can step in and say, the case is over. The defendant is not guilty as a matter of law. This usually happens after the prosecution has finished presenting its evidence but before the jury begins deliberating. Sometimes, the judge can make this decision even earlier, during the trial, if the evidence is clearly insufficient. The key point is that the judge is not deciding if the defendant is guilty or innocent based on facts. Instead, they are checking if the evidence meets the legal standards needed for a conviction. The judge's ruling is based on law, not personal opinion. They assume the prosecution's evidence is true but find it still doesn't prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This is important because it protects the defendant from being tried on weak or incomplete evidence. It also saves the court's time and resources. A directed verdict of acquittal is usually requested by the defense through a motion after the prosecution rests its case. If the judge agrees, the trial ends with a final not guilty verdict. If the judge denies the motion, the defense can then present its own evidence and try to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence. This ruling is a safeguard in the legal process. It makes sure cases without enough proof don't go to the jury, preventing wrongful convictions. It also respects the constitutional right of the defendant to have a jury decide guilt or innocence. In simple terms, a directed verdict of acquittal is a judge's way of saying, there's not enough evidence to convict. The case stops here. It's an important part of the judicial process that helps keep trials fair and just.